Well, hello. My name is Angel Wood, and this is Crime of the Truest Kind. Hello, welcome, happy July, everyone. I know. How'd that happen? My name is Angel Wood. This is Crime of the Truest Kind. Massachusetts and New England crime stories, regional history, a little snark thrown in. I am who I am. It is not an explicit show, but from time to time, you may get a curse word. I feel like that is of little consequence to most of you who have been listening to the show for any period of time. So yes, this podcast is New England true crime, regional history, advocacy focused. Next week, I take off to the True Crime Podcast Festival in Denver, where I have met a great community of true crime advocates like me. There's also a paranormal component to the festival, which is not what I do, but equally as interesting, I think. Frito's here. This is the live feed from the June 20th show at Faces Brewing in Malden, Mass. Thank you, Bob and Ryan and the whole team at Faces Brewing. There's some questions and responses from the audience that didn't get picked up very well in the audio. We'll work on that for future shows. I edited in a way that my response and Emily's responses make sense in the context of the conversation that was going down in the room. Many thanks to all of you who have supported the show by dropping a tip in the jar to give the dogs a bone. They are very grateful. All of you who have become a Patreon patron, 4 tiers starting at just $1. Thank you for that. You help and send me to Denver. The show will take a short break for August, returning in September for what I consider season 4. I did this last year. Same thing. Took a short break. Came back with season 3. And I have a number of interviews planned for season 4. And a number of topics to cover. A lot of which you have emailed me about. That's tremendous. Keep doing that. Keep telling people about the show. Thank you for 5 stars. New Jersey girl in Vermont. They write, fabulous podcast. Everything is great about this podcast. Best host ever. Thank you. I don't even know them. Monthly minis are coming during this break and throughout. Thank you. I really don't want to air commercials. I don't like them. This is episode 68. You will find the slides from the live show presentation posted at crimeofthetruestkind.com. We talk about many unsolved cases, or unresolved, as they are often called. Episode 68, Massachusetts Cold Cases, with my guest Emily Sweeney, journalist and reporter for the Boston Globe's Cold Case Files. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I know it's boiling everywhere. I wasn't even going to bother being pretty. I walked out of the house like this and kind of put my makeup on in the car, which I normally do anyway, even if it's hot or cold. My name is Angel Wood. Thank you all for being here. I host a podcast called Crime of the Truest Kind. It's based on New England, Massachusetts mostly, but a lot of New England crime. And there's history in there, so I always learn something every single time. It's not a comedy, but I do sometimes have some dark humor. I got my start in radio several years ago. I would be surprised if any of you remember me from the radio, except for Emily, because we've been around. We've been around. You do? You do? I did radio for a lot of years, and so transitioning into doing podcasting was pretty easy for me because I knew how to research, but I'm definitely still learning. I knew how to use audio, edit audio. I'm not afraid of speaking in front of people.
So it just was it was a pretty easy transition. So I started doing the podcast in 2020. I'd always wanted to do one, and then we all found that we had this big window of time to fill. Some people were baking sourdough bread. I was researching crimes. And then Crime of the Truest Kind was born. And then I took a small hiatus and came back to it, and I have every intention on keeping up with producing the podcast every other Friday. This will become a podcast episode. If at any point you have any questions, we will answer them, but what we will do is make time for a little Q&A at the end, whatever you want to talk about. If there's any questions about something that Emily Sweeney has written about, anything that I've talked about, anything that's going on in the news, we're happy to talk about it. Couple of things I want to make mention of. Today is June 20th. 2024. Today is the 24th anniversary of Debra Melo's disappearance. Unsolved. The family definitely has feelings about what happened with Debra. And I do episodes about it so you can listen to those. So today was Light a Candle for Debra Day. Wherever anybody was, anywhere in the world, light a candle, think of Debra, and share your photo or share a GIF or something. So this is for Debra. My friend, Emily Sweeney, joins us. This is our second show together. Emily has been a writer, journalist, writer, author for as long as probably I've been on radio. Double digits, right?
Oh, yeah.
And Emily, back in, end of, probably mid-2023, you started Cold Case Files with the Boston Globe.
Yep.
And it's been going well. And I appreciate all of the subjects that you have covered. And there is a newsletter, so subscribe to Emily Sweeney's newsletter, and you will get them delivered to your email. So we're going to talk about Massachusetts cold cases, which is what Emily has been writing about. What is a cold case? Well, I looked up the technical definition. A crime or a suspected crime that has not been fully resolved, that there hasn't been any new leads or new information, and it's just sort of languishing. So these cases need attention and to be re-energized and reinvigorated, and that's what we like to do with doing these shows, what Emily's doing, what I try to do with my podcast. Sometimes called unresolved. I notice that language comes up a lot. So in Massachusetts, everybody here live in Massachusetts? All right, it is the best place. There are 3,989 unsolved murders that are documented. Wow. Now this is through Project Cold Cases, Cold Case Homicide Stats, and I do like statistics and data, I say it different every time. This is from the FBI's Uniform Crime Report data going from 1965 to 2022. So if we add 2 more years, that's probably going to be boosted. I'd hate to say it, maybe a couple hundred people, I'm not quite sure. But that's as of the 10,000 or more murders. And the state of Massachusetts claims a 61% clearance rate.
It's like almost like flipping a coin.
Do you think?
You know what I mean?
Do you think they have a 61% clearance rate?
I mean, I'm not sure. Those stats came from what, Project Cold Case?
Yeah.
I mean, if that's accurate, it's just scary. You know what I mean? To think that, a loved one could be murdered and literally, whether it's solved or not, 61%.
201 missing people in Massachusetts. According to NamUs, that is the clearinghouse database where everything gets entered in. It gets entered in by law enforcement, so it's not something where, you think your loved one's missing, you go in and enter it. It has to be done through law enforcement. This is certainly not a complete record of everybody that's missing in Massachusetts. This is just what NamUs tells us. That's the missing unidentified person system. unidentified people, 203 in the state of Massachusetts. These are people who have passed away. They didn't have identification. Nobody knows who they are, and they sort of languish in morgues, or I'm not even quite sure. There's something called an unclaimed person. These are persons who pass away, and no one, family, friends, come and claim their bodies. There are a couple of reasons for that. Financial limitations. Families are nervous about the expense, and they can't see any other way than to not claim their loved one. Family estrangement is another big one. Families sometimes don't even know if a loved one has passed. They have fallen out of touch for whatever reason. And, or, as it says here, this happens a lot in nursing facilities, nursing home facilities, where there may not be updated information for them to contact anyone to come and take care of their loved one. Okay. Emily Sweeney has been writing about cold case files, and I asked Emily for tonight's show, give me 3 cases that we can talk about. I have heard of this one. All of these are infuriating, by the way. We start with Gail Miles, Roxbury, Massachusetts, was killed in 2011. She was the first Black police officer in Watertown. She worked there for at least 20 years, right?
Yeah.
Considerable amount of time. She dealt with a great many issues: racism, sexism, cops. She was found murdered. Let's pick it up, Emily. What did you learn?
Yeah, so this case, like you said, is infuriating. Really? And it's wild that it hasn't gotten more attention. You know, when you think about a police officer getting murdered in their own home, like, what? And that's what happened to Gail Miles. When Gail was, I actually wrote a story when Gail filed a lawsuit against the police department, you know, alleging, you know, just for all the abuse she endured. And she was still alive when I wrote the story. I didn't get to interview her or anything like that. And then, you know, you fast forward some years later, and I found out she was like killed in her own home. She had a place in Roxbury on Wardman Road, and police came by to do a wellness check, and she was brutally, viciously murdered.
It's personal when that happens.
Yeah, and that's so one interesting aspect of this case is, you know, Gail was retired from the police force at the time, but she was a trained police officer. She's not just gonna open the door for anybody, her friends, you know, would say. So, you know, there's a thought that she may have known her killer. And another interesting thing about the case is that it was a very gruesome murder, but there was nothing stolen. There were no fingerprints left behind. This is according to her family. And the gun that she usually had has not been found.
Is that right?
Yeah. So
Wow.
it's bizarre. You know what I mean? And yeah, I've you've been talking to people about this case, and there's all, you know, there's some types of theories that Gail was going to blow the whistle on something, you know? And yeah, Gail Miles.
This is her home. She lived here in Roxbury. Now, the little that I know about the story of her home, she owned the home, but then she was selling it to someone, but someone was going to let whomever bought it's like a three decker, right? She was going to stay on the second floor.
Yeah, so she had owned the property, and then had apparently taken out other mortgages on it.
Yeah.
And the property got sold, and she apparently made a deal with the new owner to be able to still live there. And yeah.
Are there any, I'll say, theories within her family members where do they believe, are they of the belief that her former officers, her former co-workers are involved in this based on the lack of evidence that they didn't find in her home?
Yeah, so the lack of evidence made it seem like, this is a professional hit, if you will. There's been, again, I was just talking to other investigative journalists and everything. There's been talk of what was it, other police officers? Was there bad blood between, or was she going to rat them out for something? Another thing that's come up is that there was a triple murder in Waltham around the same time that Gail was murdered, and that was also a very brutal murder. And there's been, investigators have been looking at the similarities between the two. But again, they've been without any leads, and there's been no arrests, no charges. And I'm just surprised that there's not more police officers, I don't know, keeping her name out there. I don't know, but.
Yeah, we're always made to believe there's this brotherhood among the officers, and sisterhood too. But that's really interesting. That's really concerning that this happened to a retired officer and there wasn't more of an outcry from her force, the Watertown force, and others around.
Yeah, again, I know the case has been, investigated. I've been told thoroughly, and I don't know. I just really want to follow up on this and keep her name out there just in case. Yeah. Somebody, got to know something. You know what I mean?
That's always the case. Somebody always knows. It's just a matter of, sometimes it's a matter of time passing till someone's in a different position, or, that deathbed confession we hear about. Those things do happen. If there's no evidence to connect, no DNA evidence to connect this, we can't even rely on, forensic science and genetics and et cetera that are really cracking a lot of cases now, and more all the time.
Which is great, but.
All right. We're going to go back to 1995, and this is a missing person, a teenage girl, Cathy Malcolmson. Known as Cathy, her real name Catherine Ruth Malcolmson. Sometimes I think she's listed as Catherine in some of the databases, but I think generally it's Cathy. She spent the last day of her life, we think, on Friday, August 13th, 1985. She spent it with her dad, and then she said, "Dad, I got to go to work." She had a summer job. She was riding her bike to her job at a grocery store the next town over. You think it was, about 2 miles away from where she lived to where she worked?
Yeah, so 1985, she lived in Stow, and she worked at the IGA supermarket in Hudson, which is now like a big CVS. Doesn't look like anything like it once did. She got on her bike. I think it was about just over 3 miles, the trip. And she worked as a cashier. She told her dad bye, and her dad, said, be careful, especially on the bike, coming home when it's dark. And her family didn't know what happened to her until, somebody from the IGA store called their home saying, why didn't Cathy show up for work? And yeah, and so that, a search, her family was calling. I spoke to Cathy's cousin, and he told me I remembered getting a call from his uncle being like, where's Cathy? And the cousin at the time was just like, don't worry, maybe she just went to go hang out at somebody's house.
She was a teenager.
Yeah, So it definitely wasn't like her though, and yeah, and so she disappeared without a trace.
Did they suspect, this happens to a lot of kids at that age, 15, 16, they thought at that period of time she was a runaway also, which you hear a lot with cases like this.
Yeah, police, the way police handle these missing person reports and stuff, I think it has changed a lot, since the 80s and the 70s. I mean, when do you really ever hear the term runaway now? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Whereas
right.
like back then it was like everybody was running away.
Yeah.
And yeah, so, there was like the family, friends, searched for her. They put up posters and stuff. And it wasn't until about 18 months after she disappeared that a guy pulled over at the side of the road. It was like Route 62. And apparently he was taking a leak. And he sees like this white bike in the shrubs about 10 feet in.
Yeah.
And he thought it was abandoned, and he's like, oh, all right, like, it's a bike with a warped tire in the back, but otherwise in good condition. And he soon realized from coverage of her case that, oh my God, I might have that missing girl's bike. He brings it to the police, and they confirm that, yes, that is Cathy's bike. And where it was found, if you see, like, right behind that red little target there's a Rod and Gun Club right there, and that's really the only like landmark around. You can see the driveway leading up to it, and police checked out all the members of the Rod and Gun Club. Requested like lists of like who belonged there,
Right.
And that got nowhere. So to this day, nobody knows where she went.
And who knows where the bike is?
The evidence?
We can hope that they may have checked it for prints, but it was out there in the elements for what?
18 months,
18 months?
I believe. Yeah.
What are the chances of anything being salvageable at that point?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but it's, yeah.
And the condition of the bike was that one of the tires was warped.
Mm-hmm.
That would indicate, and I think you may have written about this, or I read this in one of the things I read about Cathy's case, was it could have been somebody went at her. Like she was riding her bike down the street and someone may have tried to hit her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think of, I don't know, like, when you have like a 16-year-old girl who's, healthy, good shape, like on a bike, like, you know what I mean? Could somebody have like, hit her to knock her off the bike?
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a possibility. There was, soon after Cathy disappeared is when 9-year-old Sarah Pryor
That's right.
disappeared.
Like a few months later.
Yeah. And, the Middlesex District Attorney at the time, Tom Riley, he thought it was, connected. You have like two girls who were just literally like whisked away, like off public streets. That they did have a suspect in mind. His name is John Robert Wordy.
Oh, yeah.
But he was never charged with, Sarah or Cathy's disappearance.
Is that the same person who had been in prison in another state and was out on parole and moved back to Massachusetts? So he was in jail, I think in Texas, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
He was in jail in a southern state for something similar.
Strangling a 15-year-old girl.
Yeah. And he got out
On
and
parole.
came here.
Because he was from Sherborne, so he was like, all right, I guess like go back home.
And back in the 80s, a lot of law enforcement agencies didn't talk to each other. So people in Massachusetts may have never, ever known until they started to dig in his record and trace back to where he was, right?
Yeah, well, actually, he got in trouble he tried kidnapping a woman in Newton at knife point.
That's right.
And that's when they were like, oh, wow, this guy is like, just got out of prison in Texas.
And she was able to ID him.
Yeah, and his job apparently at the time when he was on parole up here, from what I've heard, it was putting together swing sets. Like, you know what I mean? In people's
Great.
backyards and stuff.
I'm a predator. Let me be around children. It's like one step from being like the guy who works the kids' lunch, in the cafeteria.
Yeah. So, I mean, he denied having any involvement in Sarah's disappearance or Cathy's. And again, The only new development in Cathy's case right now is that a new task force has been formed, and the police have like this huge, gigantic box of files. They're just like going through.
Stow is Middlesex County, right?
Yes.
I think it is.
Yeah. And yeah, they're going through everything just like with a fine-tooth comb, and they're just trying to see if there's any leads, anything they can follow up on. And they've renewed the call for tips, you know, anybody with any information at all. So and they said they're going to follow up on anything. So it's again one of these cases that it you know, how can somebody just disappear on their way to work in broad daylight, never to be seen again?
No one saw anything at all.
You know?
It's interesting you bring up that cold case unit that was formed, and I know a little bit more about this because I did, my most recent episode talked about a 50-year-old cold case that got solved because of this cold case unit. District Attorney Marianne Ryan, Middlesex District Attorney Marianne Ryan put this new cold case unit together in 2019, and they started to delve back into some of these cases. So they're going through other files, they're trying to find people to re-question, go through the whole thing, and I'll be very, very brief, but there was a woman named Natalie Shublin who was murdered in her home in Bedford, brutally. Her husband came home and found her in the basement. They questioned a number of people. The suspect was a person of interest. They questioned a couple of times. This person says, it always gets me. Yeah, I've never been there. I've never been to I've never been to Bedford. I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, so you believed him? They questioned him like on two separate occasions. And then when they went back to look at the case, they made connections. Oh, and what also helped was somebody decided to start talking. So a woman started to talk and said, yeah, he did these things, very strange things, like they would defrauding banks. And then he would always he would always carry a knife, and he would brag about having murdered someone. I think in their home. I don't think he said where. But fast forward to 2022, they arrested someone after 50 years. So it is possible, because they had a thumbprint on the back that was on the back window of her car. And they had that in their, cache of evidence, as boxes that what we see in the movies, right? And they connected this person. So in May, just about a month ago, a man who lived in Salem, Massachusetts, who is 78 years old, his name is Arthur Massey, was convicted and got life in prison for murdering a woman 53 years ago at her home. That's great news. The unfortunate thing is he got to live in freedom until he was 78 years old. That is incredible to me that somebody got away with murder for that long. And this guy was a hustler. Like he was loan sharking, and he was, he had all this stuff going on. He had all these hustles.
Wheeling and dealing.
Illegal hustles. And after he got caught, he was still trying to work from the inside, getting people to collect his loan shark debts. 100% interest, by the way. And he was trying to pressure this woman to present herself as a witness, saying, all of this is lies, to lie for him, essentially. And then, of course, if she didn't do that, he threatened to kill her. So, 53 years now.
Yeah,
a cold case solved. So it does happen.
Yeah.
It does happen.
No, it's like, seriously, that's why it's so good to keep these out there. And you're doing such a great job with the podcast.
Thank you.
Reaching new audiences.
We're a good team.
Oh, hell yeah.
So this is another, their picture's not there. Sorry, folks. I may have another one of them coming up. I don't know, for whatever reason it disappeared. So this case, this is Andover. Also, no, I think Andover, is Andover Middlesex or Essex?
It might be Essex, but I'm not sure.
So different cold case unit if they have one. John and Geraldine Magee, they lived in Andover. They were found murdered in 2011. So they were married for almost 40 years. They ran a business. They had a construction company, very successful. By all accounts, when you delved into it, you found that they were pretty stand-up people. They didn't have employees who were angry at them. They seemed to be really decent business people who treated their employees really well. They lived in this fab house, huge. Look at that giant house they lived in. They didn't have really anything sketchy, right? So what were you able to put together for what happened for them?
Yeah, so I mean, this is another, it's a really bizarre case. They were found the morning of, the next morning after they were shot. They were found in their home, shot to death by a family member who was coming over. And the night before, they had their black Lexus SUV was discovered on fire on Prince Street in Boston's North End, which it's like, what? Like,
I know it's hard to park there, but that's a little ridiculous.
Very, and you know what I mean? When's the last, car fires in the North End? Yeah. What is this, like the 70s or something,
That's Whitey Bulger's stuff.
And so it was like this, weird, I don't know if,
They certainly didn't make the connection until after, right?
Right. They didn't, figure it out. It was their vehicle. And what's really strange is that, investigators have talked to, family members, other companies, rivals, and they haven't been able to find any enemies or anybody that they could, who would want them dead. And what's really strange is I keep thinking, did somebody get dropped off? So there must be another person who dropped off the shooter because the shooter or somebody drove their Lexus into the North End and torched it. Or he took the commuter rail, which is actually it's like a solid 50 minutes, 2-mile walk. There's 2 commuter rail stations. I was just looking at the map, actually, before coming here. And I'm like, did somebody take the commuter rail?
That's the Haverhill line. I took it.
Mm-hmm. And then shoot them and then take their car? So, again, another unsolved case.
Was anything stolen?
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah, I mean, their car. And I'm not sure if there's any contents were missing or anything because it was on fire.
It's incredibly confounding. It's so there was no reason, not that I even try to understand why criminals do the things that they do, but to go there, go to this house, murder these people brutally, steal their car, torch it, what was the driving force there? What?
Yeah. There's got to be multiple people that know somebody got the killer out there, or he took the commuter rail. There
was no Uber then. Well, maybe there was, but I doubt it.
Or maybe he took a taxi. But was he hired by somebody? That's again, unsolved. So it's very.
So
bizarre.
then, of course, you look at all of the relatives. They had children. Their son was part of the business.
Yep.
But they would have looked into that, and the son is, grieving his parents just like everybody else in the family. Yeah, they would have made that connection by now, right?
Yeah, they haven't been able to. There's no leads. So.
What got you onto that case? I'm curious.
The Essex DA, actually Essex does handle this one, has brought it up, usually on the anniversary, because again, it's such a frustrating case. They've interviewed so many people about it. And especially with the North End, the North End, I mean, that's a place, it's packed.
Always.
Somebody's a big black SUV, parked and then torched, somebody must have, seen something, so.
And you figure there's so much surveillance on everything all of the time. We're surveilled all of the time.
Yeah.
Aside from that, I mean, in 2011, everybody still had, everybody had phones in 2011. It would happen, we started getting phones way before that.
Yeah. So
Wow.
bizarre.
So Jack and Jerry, she went by Jerry. That's their massive house. I couldn't even for a minute understand what it's like to live in something the size of a Home Depot.
Whenever I drive by a house that big, I'm usually like, I wonder how much it costs to heat.
I don't like to clean my house. Can you imagine cleaning this son of a bitch? It's huge. It's like, I saw the square footage when I was reading about this, but I forgot what it was. It's got to be like, it's at like 10,000 square feet or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous home.
Bananas. All right, so we're going to move to, thank you, Emily.
Yeah,
we're
no,
going to
thank
move
you,
to
Angela.
some other cases that I want to make sure everybody is aware of. Jennifer Bourgois disappeared 10 years ago from Fall River. She's a 31-year-old woman. She moved here in, I believe, 2000, I need my cheat sheet, 2001 from Kenya. She's one of 7 siblings. Many of her siblings moved to the U.S. May 27, 2014 was the last known sighting of her. I have a typo, sorry. A neighbor in her apartment building saw her. She was sitting in her car looking through paperwork. And then no one saw her again. Her car was found early in the morning of the next day in a parking lot in North Attleboro. It was parked in a weird way, like somebody just sort of pulled in and jumped out kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It was parked like near a dumpster, but in the vicinity of the entryway to a car wash. So I don't have any photographs of it, but I'm just trying to understand the image of, what went into that. Did someone just pull that car in and run away and just leave it as it was? They ended up finding her keys and one of her shoes nearby. One story said thrown in the dumpster, but I didn't find that in some of the other stories. So we're going with the keys and the shoe were nearby. Nobody saw anything. Nobody was aware of any, major issues that Jennifer was having. She was working here as a nurse. There was one report, something that her sister was questioned, and her sister said, well, she was working as a nurse and she enjoyed it, but she was thinking about a career change. So I'm wondering if that brought other people into her life. We just really don't know. She was 31, so she would be, I forget when her birthday was. I think her birthday is in the summer, maybe August. So she'd be almost, she'd be going on 42. That's a major part of her life. Her siblings are missing out on that. She has this very big family. Of course, I always think about, well, did she leave the U.S. and go back to Kenya? There's no evidence of any of that she left, that she returned to her home country. Her apartment was in normal condition. They found her wallet, that paperwork that she was looking at evidently in her car. Her license was in the car. The keys were nearby. No one has any explanation. I believe she was single. I believe that she was not dating anyone at that time. Mm-hmm. So they weren't even sure really who to question. Don't we know it's not all the time, but a lot of the time, it's the partner, whoever somebody is involved with. Here are some photos of her, just to get a different aspect. This is a beautiful picture of her. There's a full length. She was in someone's wedding. There's a full length. She must be like somebody's bridesmaid. She's holding a bouquet in this. She has 6 siblings. No one has heard from her since. Now, to be one of 7, I'm sure you probably have issues with your siblings, but I'm sure she didn't have issues with all of her siblings, so she would just disappear and never talk to any of them again. We don't know what happened. All right, here's a story that has been bugging me. This is Bruce Crowley. He disappeared in Provincetown at the end of 2022. There are a couple of reasons why it bothers me, okay? So one, he was living here in Malden when he disappeared. He's from Groveland, Massachusetts, which is my original hometown. He left work on the 28th of December. He did not come to work the next day, the 29th. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He ended up in P-Town. We know that because the innkeeper of the Anchor Inn spoke to him. And Bruce said, I'm going to dinner with some friends. He is seen on surveillance at the inn. I don't know if there's follow-up surveillance in a restaurant. I don't know where he may have gone to eat. There's a million places in P-Town to eat. Never seen again. His belongings were found in his room. His car was parked in a lot. He was reported missing on January 4th by a family member. I could not find any information on Bruce for a year or more. He very recently, as of I think February of this year, was entered into NamUs. That's why I feel comfortable talking about him more of a public level, because sometimes when a family member goes missing, whatever happens, sometimes we never know. Sometimes they don't always issue a press release on what happened to their loved one. Sometimes the family just wants to keep it to themselves, whatever may have happened. We don't, as public people, they have a right to do that. We may never find out what happens to someone who's missing. And, you see it on the internet. Well, we've been looking for that person, helping you find them, and you should tell us. No, they don't. They don't have to tell us. They really don't. So I looked I would regularly look for information about Bruce Crowley. I didn't find anything until just earlier this year. Interestingly, around the time that Bruce was reported missing, very early in January of 2023, another very big missing persons case was taking over media coverage. That is Anna Walsh, who disappeared in Cohasset. That aggravated me for a couple of reasons. I think every missing person should get that level of attention. I don't care if it's a child who they say is a runaway. I don't care. It's a child. We need to find that child. I couldn't find anything, and there's the link down there for his NamUs site. So Bruce is kind of a chameleon. Every picture he looks different. So he's looking kind of sassy with his shades on. He looks very sort of medicinal and like a doctor in that one. So both Malden and Provincetown were actively searching for Bruce. But, another typo, sorry Bruce, on January 13th of 2023, so we're looking at a year and a half ago, his case was transferred from Malden and Provincetown to the state police for the Cape and Islands. I don't know why. Would you have any indication why they would do that, Emily?
Usually, the state police assigned to district attorney's offices are in charge of investigating deaths. So if sounds like they believe he's dead. For it to go to the DA, it's not good.
He had a lot going on. He was working in a hair salon. He was in recovery himself. He was working with a recovery organization where he also lived.
It's
gone.
Bizarre too, because you said he disappeared or he went down to P-Town in December, and that's like way off season.
Yeah.
In the winter. I've been to P-Town in the summer when it's like, crazy hopping.
Yeah.
But from what I've heard, it's a lot quieter, and a lot of businesses are closed, and only a few things are open, fewer things are open that time of year, and it's a very small town.
Yeah, and nothing's going on. I mean, there are people there.
It's really weird.
It's like bare bones. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not packed with people working the bars. There are the people who live there year round, but that's who's there. There aren't people that are going to move to P-Town to go and work in December. Is that right? 1,500. Wow. So the population of P-Town has tripled.
So it's more hopping than pre-pandemic days.
That's amazing.
Oh,
Thank
that's
you
good
for
to
that. I
know.
didn't know that. They think, though there's no proof of it, that he was there for New Year's Eve to celebrate New Year's Eve, but there's no evidence past that innkeeper seeing him at all. That's where he was last seen on surveillance, evidently. He just disappeared off the face of the earth, and he had a lot of connections. He was connected to many different things. He worked at a salon. He worked with a recovery organization. He worked for, I think there was a third place that he was involved in. So for him to just go away and not be in contact with anyone, it's so concerning. I did try to reach out to a relative. I mean, it's Facebook. People don't even sometimes see your messages if you message someone that you're not friends with. I don't know if she ever saw it. She didn't respond, so I took that as, okay, you may not want to talk about it. But I discovered that he is now officially listed as a missing person. So this case, I want to tell you about this case. You ready for this one? It's so old, you can tell. This is another case where I couldn't find any information. I had heard through, like neighborhood pages, internet neighborhood pages about this little boy who was found in the woods in Billerica. So Eddie Flynn, 1947, he was 12 years old. He was found murdered in the woods. His family had recently moved from Medford to Burlington. So Eddie was playing clarinet with his school band. It blows my mind, even those of us who were like latchkey kids and ran around the neighborhood without shoes and never wore a helmet, he, at 12 years of age, was given 20 cents to take the bus, walked from his home, Harriet Street in Burlington. It's off Wynn Street, for those of you who are familiar. He walked down and was going to catch the bus to go from Burlington to Medford to his rehearsal. He had his clarinet. He disappeared. Nobody could find him. They found him the next day in the woods. And I don't know if it's a story of, I really don't know what the town looked like back then in 1947. But he was found. And the language around this, the language is like sex slaying and sex slayer. It's like things that we would never even see written. And could you imagine writing a headline like, kid killed by sex slayer?
Yeah.
It's so weird. So they suspect, so you see the headlines, milkman grilled and Billerica sex slaying. There have been people of interest. One man, a man from Weymouth, they called a sex degenerate, which is my new band, by the way. Anybody want to join? He had fled Massachusetts and went, I don't recall where, I'll say Tennessee for lack of, no, who later died by suicide. His name was Eugene Leroy Leach. He had been employed at Tower Farm in Billerica at the time of the murder, which is not too terribly far from where the little boy was found. So this plaque right here, I took this picture. This plaque exists in Billerica for this little boy.
Oh, wow.
It's in this really weird spot. So I forget the main road. I want to say it's off River Street, and it's off a side road in like somebody's house. It's sort of, it looks as though it's like a driveway for somebody's house. I can't remember how many houses are on it. There's at least one. But this, and I didn't get a very good picture of it to tell you what it says, but it's, dedicated to Edward Flynn, who died in 1947 at the age of 12. I don't think it says sex degenerate on it at all. I don't think there's any of that weird language on it. But this little guy my mind's blown given the information I've learned about the story, but the fact that, Burlington to Medford for a 12-year-old, isn't that really, really, really far for a little boy to go? I don't know if this is the way he was used to it. I don't know if this is, he was one of 4 children. He was the oldest of 4 kids, so I don't know. I don't know how his family rolled, but he had when he was found, he had his clarinet with him. Oh, and one important point that all of my, looking into these really old newspapers said, they think that he decided to keep the 20 cents to buy candy or ice cream and accepted a ride from one of those sex degenerates. So clearly somebody must have said, "Hey, little boy, I'll give you a ride." And he decided to take whomever this person was up on the ride. Horrible things happened to this little guy after. It is unsolved, despite the fact that they have these people of interest and they say, well, maybe this farmer was involved. There was a letter that he sent to his wife when he fled saying he did horrible things and he was going to come back to Massachusetts and go to the police and talk to the police. He didn't do any of that. He took his own life.
Wow.
Did he do it? We'll never know.
That's do you know how far he made it? Like where his body was found?
His body was found in Billerica. So he was leaving from Burlington. Burlington till Billerica is, 15 minutes.
Okay.
So it wasn't... What's that? Oh, it's absolutely the opposite direction. So whomever picked him up brought him somewhere else. And if it is this farmer milkman guy, the sex degenerate, he knew the area pretty well. And everything was all farms then. So even this area where this little guy was found was probably just open fields. Any of the houses there were probably not there at the time. I think it was people hunting maybe or fishing that found him. One of those horrible stories where, someone's just minding their own business and they come across a dead body. I wish that on absolutely no one.
Wow.
So, that is in that plaque, that little memorial is there in Billerica. And I'm surprised I found it because I just sort of guessed where it was. I'll have to go back and read it because I did not find a photograph anywhere on the internet that actually showed me what it said. Okay. How are we doing for time? We're doing okay. This person, this is one of those unidentified cases. It's a heartbreaking case. 10 years ago, this boy, we don't know how old this guy was. He has since been called the man of the dunes, like the lady of the dunes, whose case was finally solved. All of these years later, cases do get solved, I promise. So the remains of this man were found June 4th, 2014, so just 10 years ago, by someone walking along Town Neck Beach, minding their own business, and boom, there's this horrible scene. But he was not intact. It was a torso, head, limbs removed, so whoever did this monster, wrapped in a tarp, and strapped to a moving dolly. So the way he was found, incredibly awful. And he was found behind like a Jersey barrier in the beach parking lot. So I'm trying to remember if I've been to this beach in Sandwich. I'm sure I have. I just can't remember where. I mean, I don't know if it might be very different 10 years later. So what they think is that he was 6 feet tall, 230 pounds. He had a long surgical scar, possibly from hernia surgery on his abdomen. They have no idea how old he was. So that by itself is a huge problem. But then they have a snapshot, a DNA snapshot, where they give us a little bit more information, but we still don't know. It still doesn't really give us any more. A couple of things that could help. This is the dolly. And this shirt, he had this shirt on. He was wearing black sweatpants, and this shirt is the only identifying thing about the whole thing. It's from a Cranston industrial business in Warwick, Rhode Island. They couldn't trace any of this, too, because supposedly this was some kind of promotional T-shirt that hundreds of people got. He is on NamUs. They have DNA. Somebody, somewhere, knows. But it's heartbreaking to think that somebody's loved one was found like this and is unclaimed and unnamed. It's like Ruth Marie Terry, the Lady of the Dunes that was found in Provincetown. She had no identity for all of these years until she was finally identified last year. And she was buried in the Provincetown cemetery, which I think was so lovely that the people of Provincetown buried her. They gave her a grave, and it was like the unknown woman, Lady of the Dunes. And that has since she has been identified, that marker has been changed to give her an identity. And despite the fact that her murder is technically unsolved, they do believe it was her husband, who's also dead. He got out of that. So those are the cases that I have prepared for you. I'm going to click through a couple of things, and then we'll answer some questions. We'll talk about whatever you want. Andy Puglisi, missing boy, went missing in 1976. Disappeared without a trace. How does a little boy swimming at the town pool disappear without a trace? Well, we suspect that it's probably not unlike the Eddie Flynn story where there were some sex degenerates in the neighborhood. It's been proven. There were a number of things are different now with the advent of the internet and how people get information and trade information. But back in the 70s in particular, it was a really dangerous time for children on the street. Children were being pulled off the street and trafficked. I mean, we didn't use this term sex trafficking back then, but children who were pulled into these lifestyles, I don't want to call it a lifestyle because that's not even fair, but they were called child prostitutes, which is not a thing. Children they can't consent to that stuff. Melanie Melanson, Wilbur, Massachusetts, went missing in 1989. Her family has a lot of, I'll call them theories. Her family believes they know what happened to her. And they want the people who know, who were there with her. She was at a kid party in the woods. Something bad happened to her. 2 men in particular who were said to have been with her said, I don't know, he was the last one. They did this. He was with her. Those 2 men still around, still local, still getting in trouble. Unsolved, Deanna Kremen, Somerville, Massachusetts. All of these cases are infuriating. 1995, living in Somerville, walking, the story is that she went to her boyfriend's house, called her mom and said, Mom, I'm going to be late. I'll be home shortly. Her boyfriend said He walked her halfway home, not very far, maybe a mile, half a mile. You know what Somerville's like, it's just block after block. She didn't make it home. She was found by children the next day in a parking lot. The kids were taking a cut through to go to school, and she was found. She was sexually assaulted, strangled, and left there. She loved kids. That is not what she would have wanted. She would not have wanted those little children to find her like that. Deanna Kremen, still unsolved to this day. Don't know about the boyfriend, quite sure he's been questioned. He's had his own trouble subsequent to what happened with Deanna. Rita Hester. Rita Hester was murdered in her apartment in Allston. She was 34 years old, lived in Allston for a number of years, had moved here from Connecticut, where her family is. She came here to live more comfortably as a trans woman, and she was back in the 80s and 90s when she was here. You know, when she first moved here, yeah, there were lots of snickers for this big, beautiful, black woman who was living as a trans woman. But a lot of people were very accepting of her. A lot of people in the music community in particular were accepting of her. She went to rock clubs, she hung out at the dive bars, but she also went to jocks where she would do drag and perform. So she was somebody that was, living with different communities, the rock community, the drag community, the LGBTQ plus community. Certainly we didn't use that language then. It was very different. We didn't use any of this language then. She got called, I'm sure, every horrible name. She was murdered in her apartment. Unsure what happened, nothing was taken. We can suspect that she came back home maybe she brought someone back home to get something or to, have fun. And the police, when she was discovered, when somebody called the police came, but they didn't go into her apartment right away. So could Rita have survived the 20 stab wounds to her chest? It's possible if the police had gone in sooner to take her out of her apartment and bring her to the hospital. She died on the way to the hospital. Unsolved to this day. Somebody knows something. Emily featured Charlene. You want to talk a little bit about Charlene in the conversation?
Yeah,
you wrote about her very recently.
Yeah, Angela, and you were the one that introduced me to this case.
Yeah.
And when I heard about it, I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, a young woman found murdered in Union Square. Anybody who's been to Union Square, you know how bustling that place is. Like, what? How could that happen?
I can't believe that she was the story of Charlene is she was missing for a number of days. She had borrowed her dad's car. She was missing for a number of days. And they found her car in a parking lot in Union Square. How long was she there that no one noticed there was a woman dead in a car?
6 days she was missing. It was 6 days. So, she was looking to buy a car, and a friend said that they knew somebody that was selling a Lexus for a good deal. It's a $6,000 Lexus. She might be able to get it for $4,000. So she had $4,000 in cash with her. And that cash was gone when they found her body.
Yeah.
So it was clear it was a setup. And, there's definitely the chance that multiple people, there might be a witness too, because the way, she was shot from the back. So somebody in the back seat. So somebody was probably in the passenger seat, possibly. And the fact that it's a friend of a friend, you know what I mean? The 6 degree, there's not even 6 degrees of separation.
That's really interesting you say that, because I didn't put that together right away. Somebody said, I have a car for a sweet deal. Charlene had money saved in the bank for this car.
Yeah, when I talked to her sister too, she was supposed to be in her sister's wedding. you know, when she went missing. And so the poor sister had to get married, like, you know what I mean, in this tumultuous time. And, you know, obviously the family's never been the same. But yeah, the fact that she was found in such a busy spot. And Angel, yeah, like I said, I had never even heard of her case until you covered it. So I got to thank you for...
Well, thank you for doing it. This happens. We see this. There is this thing called, you know, missing white woman syndrome. I believe everybody deserves the same amount of attention when they go missing. And to that point, when I'm sure most of us or all of us have heard the story of Gabby Petito, who went missing and was found murdered, and it's a very horrible story about how the boyfriend was suspected of doing it, and they found information where he confessed in his notebooks, and he came back to his parents' house, and his parents allegedly helped him cover it up. And when Gabby went missing, it was huge media, wall-to-wall coverage, and her family was very uncomfortable. Well, of course, they're mourning. They're very uncomfortable by all of the attention, and they want to know what's up with their daughter. And, you know, finally they did find out what happened to her, but they were really bothered by the level of attention that Gabby got versus other people who were missing at the same time. And Gabby Petito's family has since been working to amplify more people of color, women of color in particular. So that to their credit. Nobody really knew. I didn't really know anything about Charlene until I started just reading about cases. Brittany T., this is a confounding story. I know that you've been, Dubs has been talking a lot about this, and you have a relationship with some of her family members. This is a confounding story because this is not anything like any of her relatives know of her. She just disappeared. She walked away from her home in Brookfield, Massachusetts with nothing. She had the clothes on her back, right? Nothing else. Her phone. That's it. She's gone. No trace of her whatsoever. Does her family have ideas about some people who could have been involved? Yes. You're nodding yes. Okay, we will talk about that. Is this the last one? Okay. Karina Holmer, Boston, Massachusetts. Karina's anniversary is coming up on Saturday, which is also my birthday. This was why this case has resonated with me for a long time. There's a couple of reasons. It's in Boston, and I love being from Boston and being a Massachusetts person. She was 20 years old. She came here from Sweden. She was here for 3 months. She was working as a nanny. Didn't love the nanny job. On the weekends, she got this bonus, how she got to stay in her employer's, the people that she nannied for, the man had a photography studio in South Boston. She got to stay there on the weekend, so she partied hard when she was here. She disappeared. She was found the next day. Part of her was found in a dumpster on the corner of Boylston and Ipswich. Yeah, so down, not quite the Fenway, but down near the Fenway. So half of a person is found. The other half of the person is never found. My mind goes to, this had to have been a horrible scene wherever this happened. There's no evidence. There's no one who said, oh yeah, so-and-so was acting really strange, or so-and-so, or I saw so-and-so, or I saw her. There's a lot of, rumors and conjecture that goes on behind, this case, but no one has any real hard evidence. People will say, well, she was seen at Store 24 on Mass Ave. No, she wasn't. She wasn't. We don't have any evidence of that. Karina Holmer, 20-year-old girl here from Sweden for 3 months, ends up murdered. Only half of her is found. Her parents are in Europe. She has nobody here to advocate for her at all. Her parents aren't here. No one's here to put the pressure on. Reina Morales Rojas. Have you heard her story? She's been missing from Somerville. She's a woman who moved here from El Salvador. Her family's there. Her children are there. She has a bit of a community here. But we did not know that Reina disappeared. She disappeared in November. We didn't hear about her disappearance until January. We didn't know that she was missing. And the only reason why we found out that she was missing is because her friends in her community of East Boston started to say, Anna Walsh is on the news all the time. How come you're not talking about Reina? And I don't mean to keep bringing Anna Walsh up like she doesn't deserve it. She definitely does deserve it, but she was the only person anybody talked about. Where is Reina? We simply don't know. I think that's the end. Ta-da! Okay. Thank you, everyone. So, we have some time. I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about. What's on your mind? I think Karina Homer's case is definitely solvable. They have at least a partial fingerprint that they lifted off a trash bag. In time, I think that's how that cold case, the Natalie Shublin case from Bedford from 1971, that's how her case got solved, was a thumbprint on a window of the car that the killer took. He took her car from her house and drove it like a mile away, and they found the car in the VA parking lot in Bedford, which is, you could actually walk from the Shublin's house to the VA where the car was. If somebody gets away with something, I think it's kind of just luck for some of these people. They're not masterminds. So there are many things that I'm learning about in this true crime world that I've found myself in. Advocacy is a big part of what I want to do and what I'm working for and thinking about these families and the people involved. Another thing I'm learning about is legislative advocacy and changing the laws. Because the average, I don't know this data, I say it two different ways. I don't know all the statistics and the data like by heart, but I know people who do. Do you know that the average age of someone who comes to terms with sexual abuse is in their 50s? And at that point in time, statute of limitations are expiring. We need to wipe out statute of limitations for child sexual abuse. Because when someone finally comes to terms, or someone's finally brave enough, or someone recognizes this, and it's really hard. I've seen grown men cry in legislative committees. It's heartbreaking. But we need to change that. That's one of the things that's on the table. We're trying to I'm a little tiny cog in this big, it's not really even a movement, but we have to change. There are laws that have to change because we have to protect all of these people. You have adults that are in their 50s who have had just such painful lives because they haven't even been able to been able to come to terms. You have people that are, dying by suicide and have drug addiction, and they have alcohol, abuse problems, and they have a host of issues. But a lot of times it starts with being abused as a kid. And it's a horrible crime, but it's real. Like we talk about these, the Revere, and then somebody brought up NAMBLA. It was a movement where I'm sure it still exists because all of this dark shit exists on the internet. I think about this, and I think about little kids. When I see a little kid riding their bike alone on the side of the road, I think two things. I think, oh, how awesome that a kid's riding a bike and not sitting on their phone or playing a video game. Second thing is, I want to protect that kid from being pulled off the street by some sexual deviant I see, when I see little kids driving down on their bikes, just having fun being a kid, I'm afraid for them. Because generally, parents don't really do that anymore. Not like the way we grew up. We were just like, I remember as a little kid, I lived in Groveland, Massachusetts, not far from where you grew up. Nothing happened there. Nothing happens now. It wouldn't have taken much for one of these, pedosexual deviants to drive through our neighborhood and see all of us kids. And it's too bad, because some people just are naturally just very kind and nice, and they just want to talk to you. But then you have all of this other stuff that's like, what do you let your kids do? What do you let them do? Any other questions, folks? We had a good time. First day of summer group. Thanks for coming. So there was a question posed for you. Somebody emailed me a question for you, and they said, did you get any leads or tips from when you did your show, when you did the TV show?
Oh, the TV show on Cathy Malcolmson?
I think so.
I'm not sure what case they were referring to.
I'm not sure either.
But, since starting the cold case files in general, there has been tips that have gone into police about different cases.
Yes.
And people have been interviewed by detectives. So, yeah, I'm hoping that there will be more, with every story, so.
How often are you featuring a new story?
I'm trying to do it as much as possible. Okay. Right now, it's at least monthly.
Yep.
So.
And you can subscribe to Emily's newsletter. You can just go to, I have it linked on my socials, but if you were just to Google Emily Sweeney Cold Case Files, you can get an email sent to you regularly, so you get it in your inbox.
Yeah, and Boston.com has started posting the stories as well, so that way a paywall isn't keeping people away from reading.
That's a really good point. I do subscribe to the Globe, but it's a really good
Thank
point.
you.
Yes. So we'll give you a tip. Newspapers.com has a wealth of information. They have some really, the information I shared about Eddie Flynn, that little boy from 1947. I would only have gotten all of that information from newspapers.com, because it's an archive, and you can get access to the Globe.
Yeah, the Globe is archived
current day Globe stories. Newspaper.com, it is a subscription, but there are a lot. You get access to a lot of papers. Yes.
And the Boston Globe as a promotion now, it's I think 99 cents for 6 months, a very long period of time.
That's really good.
So,
all right. Thank you, everyone. This was fun. This is always fun to sit here and just talk about cases and do little, back and forth.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Angel, for having me.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Faces.
Nicely done.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Faces Brewing in Malden. Thank you to all of you who came out. More live shows in the fall. I am investigating different venues to go to. Libraries, spaces with a decent sound system that can accommodate this kind of media and this kind of audience. It's special. Follow Crime of the Truest Kinds online, crimeofthetruestkind.com, at Crime of the Truest Kinds. I will be making updates from True Crime Podcast Festival next week. I am hosting a panel discussion. We will be talking about Have You Seen Andy? The story of and the HBO documentary Have You Seen Andy? About the little boy, Andy Puglisi, who disappeared from Lawrence, Massachusetts in 1976. Follow the show for Massachusetts and New England true crime, regional history, a little snark, and my continued focus on advocacy, advocating for victims of crime and their families. Thank you, Emily Sweeney. We will do more together. Subscribe to Emily's newsletter. The link is up in the show notes and at crimeofthetruestkind.com. Thank you for listening. Happy summertime. I will be back with you very soon. I'm kind of always with you on the internet, on the social pages. I saw a post recently on a neighborhood board where someone shared Ring camera footage about someone, 2 people actually, walking up to their front porch and trying to get into their front door. I know this happens a lot, and I close this episode the way I close every episode. Lock your goddamn doors.